Hello everyone, Dr. Jeff here with Jim Case, sitting in the Oceanside Harbor on a beautiful evening. Just spent about an hour together talking about what we're going to bring into this conversation tonight. So a lot of time's been spent in preparing these discussions with the number of years we've known each other and our common paths, yet dissimilar paths and beliefs and all that. But as much as this may sound at times like just a sit down and let it rip sort of thing, we have done some brainstorming, a little bit of organization, and desire to be able to present something that's both stimulating, relevant, and also entertaining at the same time. This evening we wanted to bring this idea forward. We've been working with this construct of where did we come from, and that leads us into the why are we here, and then we're going to at some point talk about where are we going. So for tonight, in this segment, discussing why are we here, more specifically, we wanted to, between the two of us, kick around the idea of why are we here with regard to the intimate relationships that we are in, or that we've had, or that we desire, and all of the above. So that's what we want to attempt to probe into tonight, and it's a little risky. It's a little transparent in that clearly that what we discuss and what we talk about is a reflection of some of our own personal experiences, our own belief systems. And what who we are is kind of what we believe and what we talk about. And again, we're not claiming to have the answers. We just want to have stimulating topics that are relevant and also a little bit entertaining. So, what are your thoughts on where we're going with that discussion, Mr. Jim?
And let me drop this in your lap. Boom. I think I would go. For me, it's a little different tack. As you know, I mean, I have a wonderful marriage. I've been married for 8 years to my amazing husband. Prior to that, I was married for 23 years to an absolutely amazing woman. And the contrast in those relationships is completely remarkable to me. The dynamic of how the relationships form and the foundation that they're built on, and particularly what each person brings to that relationship. They talk about how relationships, when two or more come together, three or more, however many it is, but I see that as these, if we think in terms of our energy thread, we come with this collection of abilities and ideas and thoughts and desires, and that co-creation process, that coming together of two people, is a blending of two very specific and different energies, and the creation of that larger energy that occurs is because you've got two complete beings coming together in the same energy space. And that if the relationships have shown me anything is the immense amount of sensitivity and clarity and unconditionalness you have to bring to that experience in order to maximize the two high potentials.
Right.
Because if you're coming at two different, you're coming from two different energetic levels or experiences, one either has to go down or one either has to come up, for lack of a better way of saying it. Either
Right.
one has to expand or one has to contract, if you want to look at it in that term. But to me, the basis of my experience currently in relationship and what I've evolved through over 30 years of married, intimate experience is the importance of finding that unconditionalness, to finding that space of recognizing that it's not my job to change them, to fix them, or to make them anything other than who they are right now. And if who they are right now is in resonance, then magic happens, then amazing things happen, because the only thing you can do in that space together is uplift. So every energy you bring to the dynamic is continuing to uplift not only yourself, but your partner by proxy, or your partner and by proxy yourself, depending on what you're contributing for what purpose, if that makes sense. So I think that the ability to be intimate in large part is to have that unconditional space of there are no wrong choices. We all have to do what we have to do for our individual needs, and if we're not taking care of that, it's very difficult to be unconditional. Because if you leave you out of the equation, what's your reference point? You've now made your reference point the other person, and that's not healthy, to my way of saying it.
Right. What would you attempt to describe or define as unconditional love? We've all heard the word.
Well, I'm going to say, I kind of want to keep those two things separate, in the sense that, for me, if you are truly in the space of love, you can't be anything but unconditional. Because that is what the true space of love is. You can be unconditional and not necessarily love, but I don't think you can love and not be unconditional, if that's truly the space you're coming from.
So what would conditional love be?
What most live in?
Say more about it. How would you operationalize that?
Conditional love means that anything and everything in the relationship is based on a condition. It's based on, it has to be this or this. It has to be, this has to be mine. This has to be yours. This has to be. There's the conditionalness, and the conditionalness can be big ones or it can be lots of little ones. It's just, it's where both people bring to the relationship all of the conditions or lists or descriptive adjectives that they've put on their profile pages of their perfect mate. Their perfect partner.
So give us some examples of what normal conditions are that show up that you hear people talk about.
Well, there are different levels of condition. There's the surface experience, which is I'm looking for, a tall, handsome, professional.
Let's just start with the physical. There's a physical condition upon which you're either in it, in an absolute height, weight, appearance, or you're out of it. And if you're in it, I expect you to stay in it. Is that a condition? I expect you to be at 10% body fat because you're there now and that's what I'm attracted to, and you need to stay there for me to continue to love you. Would that be one very shallow definition of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I expect you to run 3 miles a week, or go to the gym 3 times a week, or prepare yourself, maintain yourself, because that's what I'm attracted to.
Yes, and that's all at the very surface, because you can dive into, I think more often than not, the surface conditions sort of protect the emotional conditions, or protect the emotional.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I expect you to have a job. Would that be another normal condition that most people...
I think as you were talking, I was finding myself wanting to step back and go, wait a second. I think for me it's losing context, because the idea of being unconditional is so much more than any of that.
Of course.
I mean, it's because you can compromise on your list. You can decide that they have enough of good character qualities or characteristics that the ones that they don't have will be okay.
Yeah.
And that's just, like picking, I don't know, trying to shop for vegetables and deciding which vegetables feel right and which ones look the right color and which ones have the right shape. And
I'm going to take a little detour, but I promise to get right back to where we're focused right now on maybe operationalizing or trying to define unconditional love versus conditional love. And it's funny, we use that in our vernacular. It's interesting to me that we can't just say love, that there has to be an adjective in front of it to describe that which we're truly trying to get to. Even if you say, I love ice cream, I suppose you're probably talking about solid ice cream rather than runny ice cream at some point, or warm ice cream, or ice cream in the process of becoming ice cream. There's a point at which this is ice cream, and I say I love it because it's this temperature, these range of flavors, or it's not too sweet or too bitter or too runny, right? There's a point at which you would say, oh, it's ice cream, but I'll love it, right?
Well, I'll throw something else into the mix while you're talking about that, and I think that point that you're talking about, that's qualified, is actually just satisfaction. I think ultimately it is, I love this because it satisfies X.
Well, let's talk about X. Let's get into X.
Well, it depends. Yeah, X is whatever is desiring to be satisfied. So, some people can eat ice cream and it satisfies their palate. But usually for stuff like that, when people say they love ice cream, there's usually an emotional component that it satisfies. Now that can get all kinds of crazy, because then you can get into which is chemical versus which is emotional versus which is...
Well, sure. So in some of my adventures around the globe, one of which most memorably, Bangkok, Thailand, any street corner would be a vendor selling bugs, much like there would be a dirty hot dog stand in New York City or something like that. There's a push cart with maybe 10 different types of bugs: grasshoppers, crickets, a variety of beetles, spiders, roaches, everything. And they were dead, and they would put them in a bag and present them to the purchaser like a bag of popcorn. And the person buying it would then have a big smile on their face and give them the money for it, and would start walking down the street and putting grasshoppers or crickets or whatever it was in their mouth and eating them, and being quite delighted by that because they loved that, and I didn't love it. I could probably learn to love it, and I probably would have learned to love it if I was brought up in that culture. So back to the ice cream thing. You may say, what's fascinating to me, and sticking to the bugs, is there have been so many documented survival stories where people that have gone splunking, cave exploring, who did not have a diet of ants or any other insects that were inside the cave, that once they became stranded, dislodged, or stuck, survived off of droplets of water that would form on the rocks, or ants that were crawling across the rocks. And they describe this process as detesting it in the beginning, being aware that there are ants crawling around, and then day 5 sets in and I'm getting hungry, and by day 10 I gotta eat something because nobody's coming to get me. And by day 20, I can't wait for the ants to show up. Day 21, oh boy, more ants. Day 22, these ants are the best thing in the world. And then finally I get rescued and I tell everybody about I survived by eating ants. And they're like, what? Ew, how could you? To where the brain literally switched and it reprogrammed itself to go, I used to hate that. And within a month, less than a month's time, I can't wait for it. I'm enthralled by it. Give me more of it. I can't wait. I gotta have it. And these people are just like, how did this happen? Isn't that fascinating to where you could say, I hate ants, but within a month, loved them because my life became dependent on it. So how much are we really in control of that? Any at all? I mean, that had nothing to do with consciousness. That was so below consciousness for that programming to have taken place. That it's just fascinating, and I love telling that story. And it's not just a one-off story. That is a very common story, and it's not always ants either. But
right.
It's that whole notion behind the brain reprogramming itself to love something it once detested. And I don't know that's, we're maybe a little bit off the beaten path with the definition of love, and that really isn't about unconditional love, but really, I mean, that's such a powerful statement that before we can just talk about it and express it and assume that everybody understands it, we got to kind of like, well, what is unconditional love? What is love? So that's what we're playing with right now. And Tina Turner would say, what's love got to do with it, right? Because, I mean, you could even take that to the point of, what about the era in human history where love had nothing to do with relationship? It was all about two families or two tribes, or it was an arranged marriage, or it was economics. And, that's over time, I would venture to say that even if it wasn't an infatuation physically or emotionally or spiritually that drew two people together, that over time there was probably a fondness or an affinity, or some of these other words that we use to describe an appreciation or a deep caring for somebody, even if you weren't sexually attracted to them or emotionally attracted to them or intellectually even in the same stratosphere. You could appreciate that person because they appeared to be part of your team. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a piece to the whole unconditional love and love equation, is you kind of have this sense that we're on the same team. I'm on a roll right now. There was a Christmas party I went to 10 years ago where I was watching the interaction between this husband and wife, and they kept drinking and getting more animalistic or into their lower brain, and there was a point at which the wife was intentionally flirting with an older guy and like sitting on his lap, and the husband was up doing karaoke, and at one point he was doing karaoke and the wife came up and grabbed the microphone out of his hand and smacked him over the head with it. And in that moment I saw them both smile at each other. So what looked like domestic violence that was about ready to erupt in the middle of this, Christmas party thing, it was their level of foreplay. That for them, that showed them that they had something for each other, but it had to kind of like digress and devolve before it got their attention. It was in some way like, if you fight with me, that's our love language. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting piece to draw into the discussion too, is this idea of love language. You've probably read the book. For the audience, the 5 primary love languages would be physical touch, encouraging words, acts of service, quality time, and gift giving. So I'm patting myself on the back right now for reaching back into the archives of my mind from however many years ago it was that I read that book to be able to go, okay, here it is. Normally what happens to me when I do this is one of them is absent, like I can get 4 out of 5,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course I'm thinking, well, duh, the one you can't remember is probably the one you do the least, or it's the one that you're most deficit in, or whatever, some form of not lacking unconditional love of myself. But I've rambled on. It's your turn.
Well, I'm going back to this, to the what is unconditionalness. I think that we all live pretty conditionally. If this, then that. If this is this way, then I'll feel this way. And I think in the beginning, I think some of unconditionalness is about being easy with each other. It's not hunting flaws. It's not hunting anything.
Right,
it's just a willingness to coexist in each other's spaces and not have any sharp edges.
Right.
Right.
I have my kid gloves on rather than my boxing gloves.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I mean, in terms of how it shows up for me in my relationship is when the communication is there and the respect and the trust is there, and it's much easier to allow for that. So how that looks is in contrast. When I was married to my wife, it was a very intense experience of consistently being thrust into looking at myself. Look at yourself. Look at yourself. Look at yourself. If this is what's happening out here, take a look. What's going on in here? What's happening? What's happening? And it was also toward the end. It got to the point where it was getting a little too much. In that that was part of what I had to be willing to stop doing to be able to leave the relationship. Mm-hmm. Because even at that final conversation, when I sat on the end of the bed and said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. We've been down this road 400 times, and the thing that keeps us going back down the road is because I allow you to continue to redirect my focus back into myself again, and for me to go find my problem and to solve my issue." And that's been incredibly, incredibly valuable, and it has propelled me in my evolution and in my own consciousness. But what I know now is that's not okay now. I'm not going there. I'm done. And if there's something still wrong with me, so be it. I'm okay with that, because what I know is that this can't continue in this form anymore. We are creating, when we got together and we chose to get married because what we were creating between the two of us was very powerful, very effective, and very impactful.
Yeah.
And for the last 4 or 5 years, what we've been able to create is really ugly dark clouds everywhere we go. It's not like we reserve it for sticking it at home. We'll shit in the restaurant, we'll shit in the mall, we'll shit in the movie theater, we'll shit anywhere. And I'm so like, that's just not, no more, But the point of it, of where I'm going with that, I don't know why I ended up going there so far into the story, but is in contrast to how I've grown in that, and in that recognizing that it isn't always, yes, it's always good to go back to self in the dynamic of a relationship, and I do it all the time in my relationship with Michael, is if something is eating at me, I can't and won't bring it to him until I've spent time with it, sifting what things I think he needs to change and what things I think he needs to do better, As long as that language is in my thought process, that conversation will not happen with him.
Awesome.
Because what I know is it's not my job to change him. It's not my job to tell him that he's deficient, and it's not my job to tell him that he needs to be better at something.
Who would he be if you could?
Certainly not the amazing human being he is. I mean, you know, and in contrast to that, there, on the flip side, from an emotional spiritual perspective for me, because of the process and because of the intense experiences that I've had over the last 5-6 years between the higher brain living and the ayahuasca experience and just the explosion in consciousness growth, the only thing that I've ever said about that with my husband is, you don't have to go where I'm going. I know that my life is moving, and you know it, you're experiencing it, but for me, I don't care if you do what I do. I don't care if you think how I think. But what has to happen is that if we're going to continue to be together, we have to stay in the same ballpark. So you don't have to go, you don't have to go to sit and meditate with me. You don't have to do higher brain living. You don't have to, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any of it. But whatever you do, make sure you're staying in the vicinity. Because, and at one point I even described it, and I said, because what happens is that if I'm continually striving to expand and grow and expand, and you're not staying in the ballpark, there's a point where energies are not going to have no relation anymore. It's basic physics and science. There's a point where there will be no more relation, because we're not relating. We're here. We're doing this. And I don't want that, because it doesn't mean bad things. It just simply means here we were vibrating together, and this was really cool, and it was working, and the more intensely we could do that, the deeper we could connect intimately. But then suddenly something happened, and now the vibrations, whether you want to call them up, out, down, bigger, larger, it doesn't matter. This vibration and this vibration aren't vibrating in the same space.
Right. One of the things that I quite frequently have to bite my tongue as I'm working, when I'm doing marriage counseling or couples counseling, I'll ask people, well, it's a telltale in the furniture arrangement in my office whether people will actually sit together on the same sofa, or one is on one and one is on the other. But if they do sit together, it's also interesting to see if they sit next to each other or how much distance is between them. And I bring it to their attention right away. The reason you guys are here, in my opinion, I'm willing to be wrong, but I'm probably not, is that you want some sense of togetherness and closeness and connection. So please sit together. Even if it's uncomfortable, do it for me. And I'm also going to ask that you don't have to grasp hands tightly, but I would like some form of physical connection in the form of hand holding, however you can do that. And I want you to notice 2 minutes from now, 20 seconds from now, 20 minutes from now, the point at which one of you pulls away, and it isn't to scratch or to blow your nose, it's pulling away because I'm breaking contact with you. I want you to notice what that feels like and some idea of why you're doing it. And so it's a really basic, just little experiment for them to notice. And it's really interesting because some couples were like, we're going to beat this guy and we're going to show him that we can just hold hands, even though I'm thinking horrible thoughts about him. And it's kind of funny because you can tell.
Yeah.
But the natural response is there's a point at which just the agreement to touch and make contact lowers defenses and creates a resonance, or that frequency that you're talking about, that I can tell they're really enjoying this. And how do I know? Because I'm enjoying it. I'm in that same frequency too. That the room is now green,
coherent,
or yellow as opposed to red. Right? We're not in that the red zone any longer. And what's so fascinating is as soon as we start to introduce they naturally want to get into problem solving, or some grudge that they're holding, or some past thing that they're upset about. and then they lose it, and one of them will pull away, and I won't let them talk anymore about the issue. I'm like, no, you got to tell me what was going on with you in that moment where you broke contact and pulled away. Well, it was because of this or this or this. And I go, no, that's left brain, measurable, logical, empirical. What was happening on the other side? What was the feeling that was going on there? And people don't know. They don't know how to describe that. They don't know how to talk about it or use words for the fucking bitch or the asshole or whatever. And it's like, well, if you got to start there, then at least let's start there and we'll talk about that part of it. But what's so interesting to me is they like the connection, even if it was under the orders of the doctor. It felt good to everybody. And it's like, in that moment, I'm like, write me the check, pay me for my hour, you're done. Just do that. Just do that. And you guys will be happy. You'll be fine. And I'm being serious right now. I've accomplished my work. But then there's this thing called the ego. And it's like, as soon as we get into ego, it's just like the ego has to be right. And as soon as we do that, the hands are no longer touching. And now we've got two egos sitting in front of me. And I'm trying to stay over here in the spirit soul connection side of things and not get my ego involved. It's just so fascinating to me that people will choose. This is the important part. People will choose the rightness or the correctness, the accuracy,
the conditions.
The conditions, thank you. Awesome. Thank you for bringing us back. The conditions that their ego needs or believes that it needs. Even though we've talked previously about I hated ants, but now I love ants, we know that those conditions can shift and change. And they're shaped by culture and history and programming and all that. But it's fascinating to me. People will prefer the correctness and the conditions of their love rather than just, I don't care if I'm right or not. This feels good. I just want to hold your hand. I just want to be close to you. It's just fascinating to me. You would think it would be such a no-brainer to, who cares if you're right? You know, the whole happy wife, happy life idea, or the happy partner. You know, I don't know if there's a word that rhymes with partner that would fit, but happy spouse, whatever. But the idea is that if you can create a condition in which you can both be happy, who cares if you're right? But we do! And that's the part for me where I'm just like, isn't that amazing? As human beings, we want to be right more than we want to be happy or at peace. That's what I see day in and day out and day in and day out. It's amazing to me.
Well, I think if there is not something that draws you deeper into your own experience, that you're forever molded by what's presented in your environment. So everything that's presented, you know, if you just paid attention to what's happening in the world via TV news, you know, Facebook, whatever, anywhere you go, that's the message. Gotta be right, gotta be powerful, gotta be beautiful, gotta be whatever it is you've adopted.
All the conditions.
All the conditions that are all ego-driven. And our culture is so, and our world for that matter, in large part, is so geared to that vibration. It's geared to stimulate that vibration. It's geared to stimulate those thoughts. It's geared to stimulate that constant idea of enoughness. And the idea of connection is not promoted. It's not stimulated in the same way unless you seek it.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating, you know, that it's sort of structured that way, because you actually really have to seek it. And maybe because the preponderance of the vibration on the planet is about the ego, so in order to not be there, it's the whole thing of state shift. It's the whole thing of you have to shift your vibration to a different place in order to go above conditions, in order to rise above the need for conditions.
Yeah.
As a way of satisfying yourself.
One of the people that I'm working with recently brought in this notion with regard to relationship about the origin of the idea of property. And there was a point in human history where somebody said, I own this rock. If you step on it, I'm going to smash your head, or something like that. And then it became a field, and then it became something else. And at some point, commerce and money got involved, and there was a piece of paper that said, I paid for this, and I own this, and everybody recognized it, and it was kind of just generally accepted that you can actually own something. And there are some cultures. There's this awesome video of this sociologist working with a group of kids in Africa, and this guy had an apple that he took out of his backpack, and he set it in the branches of a tree, and these kids were over here playing about 50 feet away, and he said, hey, whoever can run over to the tree the fastest can have my apple. And they all looked at him and were like, well, why would we want to do that? That apple isn't enough to feed all of us, and if only one of us had it, it would make everybody else feel bad, and we would too. So keep your damn apple. We don't want it. And the guy was like, what? I don't understand this. If it's not good for everybody, we're not going to do it thing. So that's kind of, like the idea of anti-property, or, so ego really wants to own something. I own this, it's mine, I get to state the conditions of what happens. So we've also done that with regard to relationship. We want to own the person that we're in relationship with and state the conditions. You will do this, 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 and this, and you won't do that, that, and that. And as long as that shows up for me, then we can say we love each other. But it really is based on conditions. There are very, very few relationships that exist unconditionally. It's something to strive for, certainly, but very rarely seen. That whole idea of ownership and property, I think, is really fascinating. Boy, that made you get quiet.
Well, it's
Audience Jim is speechless for a moment.
Sometimes I have to digest, because there's so many levels and implications, and that whole thought process just, for me, just strikes that the next level of understanding the illusion. When the greatest teachers and mystics talk about this whole plane being an illusion, and more and more seeing how the illusion is built, everything built on thought, idea. Somebody had an idea, and they kept repeating the idea, and the idea became a belief, and the belief became a cultural experience. It became, and you can watch the evolution of that, and I just marvel at how much of those illusions I get to see, and how powerful they are, how powerfully they impact people, and the challenges of being able to disengage, and what happens when you disengage, when you no longer want to play in that arena. And at the same time, for me, it goes to a place of it's where appreciation really finds its source for me. Is that, as you would think that in losing in deciding to step out of the illusion, or to recognize the illusion for what it is, that you're sort of left with this, so then what kind of thing. Like, well, if this is all an illusion, so then what? Well, then what's the point? What's the reason? And what I realize more and more is that clarity is a well of appreciation for the magnificence of how incredibly designed this whole experience.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That because even in the desire to not play in that level of illusion, you have no choice, because you're living through five senses, and the five senses are perceiving the illusion continually.
Right.
So you can never be outside of the illusion in that regard. You can only acknowledge the illusion and still find a different way to interact with it. And I'm sure that continues to evolve and change, but I think that in regard to the idea of unconditionalness and intimacy in relationship is on a macrocosm, so to speak, you have a very similar process in that as long as you're not living in an illusion of who that person is, it's much easier to be unconditional, because you're not setting up this false pretense of a person. You're interacting with the person. And when you do that, there's an energetic response, there's a give and take, there is a deep interaction that begins to take place on an energetic level that goes well beyond words and interaction. Does that make sense, sort of?
It makes sense to me.
And so when you're willing to step outside of the illusion of self, ego, when you're willing to suspend that even for a short period of time, like when they hold hands, the suspension of that energy takes place for a moment, because it becomes a sensory experience, not a cerebral experience. My husband and I, one of the things, we do these things called powwows. And I was really quite fascinated as you were talking, because I'd never heard that explanation through you before. And since the beginning of our relationship, one of the things that we do is when we have to have difficult conversation, either of us feels like we got to have a tough conversation, we do what we call a powwow. And it was just something that I wanted to do from the beginning, and I kind of set the stage, and then that became our thing. And whenever we do that, we would say, one or the other would say, hey, I need to have a powwow. And we go get in the middle of the bed, sit cross-legged in front of each other, hold each other's hands, and the first thing that happened was, I love you. And we would just be with each other, and here's what I need to talk about. And we would get into the conversation, and this would disengage at the point, sometimes it would disengage out of reaction, but more often than not, because we weren't coming into the space in judgment of each other, we would hold those, that would stay there until the field felt solidified to an extent, or established. Because, like I like to talk with my hands, and he tends to kind of fidget, but when he talks, he uses his hands. So sometimes it's not always easy to stay here. But if it's at those points where we want to really, really connect, we're always here. When we're really wanting to make sure that what's being conveyed and what's being felt is really genuine, we stay here. And I just think that's fascinating to hear that. That's part of the reason I was digesting too, because I just find that just so remarkably fascinating and powerful.
I'd like to push in a little further into this idea of ownership, property, and unconditional love. This morning, my girlfriend and her friend that she's known since first grade, which is quite a long time, 40-something years, and two other people were flying to Paris to celebrate my girlfriend's friend's 50th birthday. And it was interesting to me that earlier this morning, before her traveling buddies showed up, and obviously I did not go on that trip because I'm here having this discussion and now not in Paris, it was interesting that there was some teasing going on about maybe she would meet some Frenchman in Paris and have some flirtation or an experience that would be romantic. She reminded me that Paris is supposed to be the most romantic place, and on the planet, and I'm not going. And clearly she was a little, well, maybe not clearly, but there was a little bit of jocularity or jabbing, if you will, about I'm kind of bent that you're not coming with me. And there was this innuendo or kind of little probing of, well, what if I met somebody there and wanted to have that experience? She didn't come directly out and say that, but I could sense or assume that that's the direction that this was going. And I just cut straight to the chase, and I said, well, if that's what you want to do, and if that's who you are, then that's who you need to be. And she goes, well, you wouldn't get upset about that? And I said, well, that has nothing to do with what I just said. I didn't say I'd be totally chill with it and even be happy for you. But then I was thinking, well, why couldn't I be happy for her? And you know, we're in these incarnations, and we're on the planet for a while. And how many years can you go to Paris and meet a stranger and be there for a few days and maybe drag them back to your hotel and have mind-blowing sex, whatever that would equate to? But why would I begrudge her for having that experience? You know, that's what I'm challenging myself to acknowledge. And it kind of comes back to this idea that somehow my ego wants to be her one and only that can take her to that place. And it's stupid, because it's like, well, come on, man. There's a lot of people that could take her to that place and have that experience. Or there would be even people on the planet that could take her to even higher levels of arousal or seduction or whatever. Parlez-vous français, mademoiselle, or whatever, right? I don't do that so well, but somebody else can really pull that off. But isn't it interesting that if you really challenge yourself on this notion of why would I not want my partner, I consider her to be my partner, my lover. We've been together long enough that there's a commitment there and an honoring of each other's wellness and just happiness. I don't feel that I'm responsible for her happiness in any way, but I want to be a positive influence in her life. So it's just interesting that when her friend showed up, her friend was saying, well, we'll try to be good girls, and I won't go out of my way to introduce her to some Frenchman. And I said, well, we've already had this conversation this morning, and it kind of left it at if that's what happens, it's like I'm not in control of whether that happens or not. And I don't have the illusion of needing to be in control of whether that happens or not. And it kind of isn't that I want it to happen, but I don't know that it would be so devastating to me if it did happen. I would hope that she could come home and go, I kind of didn't go there with this intention, but this event led to that event, and this event happened, and then it just kind of came together, and 3 glasses of wine, and the guy that came up and serenaded us, and the rest of the group went off this way, and somehow I was tired, and we went, and we went there. And I'd be going, I would want, my highest self would want to say, was it fun? Did you really enjoy it? Was it everything you thought it would ever be? I would love to have that kind of a response. But I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. I would like to and be clapping for her and going, hooray! I mean, gosh, that's what, who doesn't go to Paris with some fantasy like that, I guess. I don't know. But and some people may be listening to this right now and go, well, you must not really love her if you would be okay with her doing that. Because when I said that to her friend, well, if that's what she wants to do, I don't own her. And she's like, really? She has your permission to go do that? And I said, I didn't say she has my permission, but I don't own her. She doesn't need my permission. She's an adult woman. She can do what she wants. She is going to do what she wants to do. And it wasn't. Isn't that interesting though? That this whole, would I really be happy for her to have that experience, or would I be
I'm bent right now, and I'm pissed off that you went and did that without me, and she's like, well, dude, you were invited, you could have come along, and if you were there, it probably wouldn't have happened. But that's not even really the issue. The issue is, does a woman want to go, or do people want to go to Paris and meet the stranger and get romanced and get naked and have great orgasms? That's what romance novels are written about, and part of why people come to this planet and want to have these experiences. And you put all that back into the context of unconditional love. Could I love her under those conditions? And I want to say, yes, I could.
That's still conditional.
And how do you see it conditionally?
Just by virtue of what you said. You were saying the condition is being unconditional. Being unconditional is simply not having an attachment to.
Yeah.
But see, the challenge, if you dissect the many levels of what you talked about, which I'm sure you have done, there's so many places where you can obviously see the perspective and attachment, where, from the language that you use when you say, well, you're going to do what you're going to do, that in and of itself is the fuel of every daytime talk show that exists and that does with relationships. Because that very question from the woman's perspective is, you don't love me enough to want to own me.
That's interesting.
The man's perspective is, if this happens, if this event occurs, there's only two things that can really be responded to there. One, either if you're being unconditional, then it's a non-event. It's a non-event. The commitment, the energetic commitment between these two people is the energetic commitment. My husband and I had this conversation fairly early in our relationship, because we recognized that it would be foolish to think that there won't be interaction outside of the relationship sexually. Because that's not how we're built. And it's not about being whores, and it's not about being promiscuous. It's about recognizing that my home is with him. My life is with him. My heart is with him. That's the choice that I make. That's the choice that he makes. And the agreement that it's okay about that, but it's not, that's I'm going to go buy a lighter. As
Right.
far as the context of the relationship is concerned. It's, I'm going to buy a lighter. It's not a reflection of anything other than an individual desire to have a different experience, to experience something that may present itself that's a wonderful opportunity that has nothing to do with betraying my love or betraying my commitment or betraying anything else, or his. There is no sense of that possessiveness, because the only other place it can go is that if I am being upset because of it, it's largely, I think, because I am feeling inadequate. I must not be enough. Well, duh. That's not a bad thing. It's not an end of the road. It is, you can't be every single thing to every single person. I can't be every single possible flavor he wants. I hate the spumoni. I think it's the nastiest shit that was ever made. But he can bring home a half gallon of spumoni and enjoy the hell out of it, and I'm not going to feel bad because he does. I might be a little bummed if he didn't bring me a flavor I'll eat, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean. But even still, it's I can't satisfy the spumoni. So get your spumoni. It's okay. Is this? But that requires a ridiculous amount of trust and honesty and commitment and the actual day-to-day experience of this being loves that being, and that person gets to feel that every single day, not occasionally, not once a week, and it doesn't have anything to do with sex. It has to do with connection. It has to do with the moments that we connect in love, that I can be sitting on the couch and I can look in his eyes and I can sit there and I can stand in his eyes until he makes a connection, just like he can do for me. Because you can sit there and he can look at me, glance, and I'll just sit there and I'll keep looking. And I'll be like, hi. And he'll look at me again, and he's dial out. I can see it, and I'll just sit there. I'll keep looking. Say, excuse me. And he'll look at me again, and then he'll go, and then his eyes will turn on, and his lights will come on, and we'll sit there and be with that for a few minutes, and then we're good. Because we exchanged the energy. We connected in that way that satisfies us both. That we get to feel the well of love that exists between the two of us and just get to be there with it. And sometimes it's cuddling, and sometimes it's kissing, and sometimes it's cooing, and sometimes it's just being together, and sometimes it's just a big deep breath that we just have together. And
Right.
there's never, it's not a concentration of anything. It's just the desire to, this is where I want to be.
Yeah.
This is where I am.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you know that in every moment, this is where I am.
In that moment, it would appear that you have suspended egoic, empirical data, and you've shifted over into the right hemisphere and just been really wanting to experience a connection that's timeless, senseless. It's interesting that senseless came out. But in that way, it really wouldn't, other than the visual sense of I see you and I'm experiencing you, it's a frequency experience rather than a tactile experience or an emotional experience, although it would lead to an emotional experience of acceptance or oneness, unity, if you would. That's all good. That's all really good stuff.
Yeah. And so his experience, coming out of where I kind of started with this about the unconditionalness, coming out of my previous marriage, where it felt that there was this constant pressure, or feeling of constant, some ramification, because if something occurred between the dynamic of our relationship that I needed to look at X, Y, or Z, or I should be diving into X, Y, or Z, and why am I carrying that around, and why am I thinking like that, and why am I making shit up, and why am I mind fucking myself to death, and it wasn't always necessarily, it wasn't a contrived manipulation, it was a true desire on her part to keep me continually assessing the state of my energy, because for the duration, from the beginning of our marriage and from the beginning of our relationship together, that was my biggest challenge, was understanding the impact of my energy. That I carry an enormous amount of energy, and I carry a very powerful presence in my energy, and there's a responsibility to that presence that requires me to be aware of how that energy leaves my field and impacts another person's field, and what the ramifications of that interaction are, even to the degree of, and this has been interesting to try to work with people on too, but that the realization that whenever I would use my energy inappropriately, if I would go off half-cocked and I would slam somebody with my energy, the moment that happens, everything that occurs after that is my responsibility. Everything. So I would get stuck because I would have an impact moment, and then this stuff would happen over here that was really shitty. I mean, that things that I thought, whether it was her or somebody else, but I would get highly offended and very hurt and very upset because the result of my choice created this outcome. Yeah. And so it became a process of being willing to own that and stop and go, I can't stop this here. I have to rewind back to here and own it from here. and now I have to let them off the hook because that would not have happened had I not done that. And that moment, and so finding that level of responsibility for my own energy space was incredibly valuable, but it also helped coming into this relationship with Michael, because I think I've said this to you before, is a couple of key things that were always important to me was, one, that unconditionalness. If I ever found that my choices or my words or my actions were about making him be different, that conversation couldn't happen. So I'd have to roll it back and go, okay, what do you really want? What are you really looking for here? What is it that you think you don't have, or what is it you think he has, or what is it? But it's sourcing from you. It's not sourcing from him. Your reaction is just you need to take a minute with that. And the other part of that was this. I never want to see my pain in his eyes, ever. And what I mean by that is that if I use my energy inappropriately, if I use my energy in a way that is not uplifting to our relationship, then he will reflect my pain in his eyes. Because his reaction will be to my crappy energy, not to anything else.
Right.
And so having those two kind of foundational items, and then having his unconditionalness in the thrill of that, I mean, then it becomes a little more challenging because there's such a desire to create structure. But don't we need to have this boundary, or don't we need to have this? And it's not necessary because he's his own person, and so it evolves into things like he loves to go out. He likes to go out. He likes to go out to the bar and have a great time and whoop it up, and he still enjoys doing that. I have so little interest in that at all. And every now and again, I know it's what he loves, so I'll prepare myself. Say, okay, right. I'm gonna get my energy in a good space so that I can say next time he asks, yes, let's do it, because I know how important that is for him, and then I can prepare myself to do that and go out and enjoy it and engage in it and be thrilled, because the thing that brings me the joy is to seeing how much joy he gets from that experience, because he can't help it,
right?
And it's not crazy and chaotic. It's just there's that, because we connect. There's that experience of seeing the joy that he feels at me being there, at me sharing this, at being able to have the joy together, and
right.
Even if it's just going to a drag show or doing something silly, but but there's also, on the other side of that, is the freedom on both ends to just be who we are.
Right.
He knows that's not my thing. We had a conversation about it because I was feeling really badly because I knew he wanted to go, and I couldn't find any energy. I just can't do this. But please go have fun. Please take Michelle, go whatever, just go out and do your thing. And it took him a little bit to get comfortable with that, because I guess he just expected there would be some energy there. Just the same with me when I was saying no. I was expecting there would be backlash. You don't love me. Why don't you want to go out with me? And it's like, no, that's just not your thing. Because I got all twisted about it for 2 or 3 days, and I sat down and I said, I got to talk about this because I don't know what to do with it. And I said, I know it's mine, but I still don't know what to do about it. And he just sat there, he was like, why are you doing that to yourself? I know you don't like to go out like that. So when you do, it's awesome. And I really appreciate when we do, but I know you don't like to do that. Why are you getting yourself all bent out of shape about it? And that's the kind of thing when I say that unconditionalness is like, oh yeah, it doesn't brawl. You don't have to brawl. You don't have to get, there doesn't have to be anything other than acceptance and trust.
I love how you replied earlier that it was a non-event.
Yeah.
So that would be a wonderful characteristic of unconditional love, that when someone in an intimate, important relationship demonstrates a behavior, that if you are truly operating in a field of unconditional love, whatever they've done would literally be a non-event.
Yeah, because there is no response to anything other than what our conditions are. That's the only thing that causes a reaction to anything, is the conditions that we've chosen in our minds about whatever that particular thing is.
Yeah.
That's what triggers the, at least how I see it.
The way ego was described to me going through grad school was a human characteristic that has tremendous value, perhaps during the last ice age, when there was limited resources and tribes had to fight tribes over lack of food and shelter and whatnot. And the ego is wonderful for keeping you alive, keeping you going, even if that means at someone else's peril or demise. And ego can do that. Spirit, on the other hand, or soul, on the other hand, would again be kind of like the African kids of, well, gosh, if there isn't enough for all of us, then we'll go without. We don't even need it. We'll pretend that apple doesn't even exist. We don't even see it because there's just not enough of it that we could all benefit from it. And if only one of us has it, then we wouldn't know what to do with that. Just, such two different places. And today in our society, at least in Southern California, the lights all work, the streets for the most part have all the potholes filled in, and the water's clean, and the grocery stores all have food on the shelves, and we lack for really nothing. We live in an adult Disneyland, if you will, and we have the opportunity to really operate more in spirit, which was encouraging, that we don't have to be in that baser, lower brain, reptilian brain place of I don't think I have enough and I'm going to take yours for saving it up for a rainy day. And it sucks for you if you can't protect yourself or keep what you got. Ego could actually triumph over getting over on you, or I took yours, and what are you going to do about it? That's total ego. So that's just maybe the battle, the struggle, challenge, whatever concept works best for you that we're dealing with.
But I think it's also important to recognize that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that process that you just described is exactly what many bring to the relationship. That's the foundation that it's built from.
Right.
And some combination of, depending on, again, on spiritual inclination or religious inclination or not, or whatever it is, it's all kind of into the mix. And I think that what brings people together is that resonance, is that there are, whether there are different kinds of resonance, whether it's that opposites attract experience where there's a desire to experience from both people because the resonance is there. There's a desire to experience the opposite of their own experience, and to see how that interaction plays out, and can you come to unconditionalness when they're opposites? Can there be a place of trust and acceptance when you're coming from, because ultimately what you discover is that what we're calling opposites are the conditions. What we're calling this blending is a whole different other thing. And what you're saying is recognizing the egoic part. Well, most don't separate it out. And a lot of times that's where relationships, that's where you sort that out. That's where you discover it. That's the whole point of it is to my mind, is that's what you're there for, is to discover and understand that in some way.
There's a tribe in one of the colonies in Africa that once a year have a ceremony where the most beautiful woman in the tribe selects from a competition of the males in the tribe to compete for her attention and her affection. And they do these like peacocking dance things, and they spend weeks getting ready for the most fit, the most attractive, the most whatever. And there's going to be the one woman who's the queen for the year, and she's the ceremonial, going to pick out the best guy in the tribe for the year person, even though the best guy is married, even though the best guy is not single but in a relationship. Yeah, right. Can you see this happening? Yeah. And the wife or the partner of the guy that's competing is hoping he gets chosen. Isn't that a mind blower?
That's cool.
She's hoping he gets chosen because it's a reflection on her that he was chosen by her, and they're going to go have their little fling for the night kind of thing. And you're watching its video. You can Google this and watch this on video. And the disappointment of the wife thinking that her husband is going to be the one that's chosen. It's like she's more disappointed than he is. It's fascinating. And you're just like, holding your, like, I got my hands on my head right now, like, can you even believe that there's a group of people that operate that way? It's so different from how we operate. But it's back to the eating bugs on the corner in intersection in Bangkok again, eating grasshoppers and crickets. And can you imagine having a cricket leg stuck in your tooth, and like, oh Jim, you got a cricket leg stuck in your tooth right there, or a grasshopper wing or something. And you're looking at me like, you freaking lost it. But I saw that, I experienced that. That's real. Yeah. It's happening right now tonight. And just like there are people in Africa getting ready for this annual celebration of, will my husband get chosen as the whatever best concubine or the best whatever it is for the night. And that's going to reflect good on me because I'm his partner. So somehow they've bypassed ego in that one, or maybe it's just a morph of ego, because it really still goes back to the wife going, wow, that if he gets chosen, then that tells everybody in the tribe I'm with him, and that's a positive reflection on me. And so it's still kind of ego in some way, but it's just a different way of sorting through it all.
So I'm going to ask the question, what are you hoping is the outcome
of what?
The trip.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm hoping that there's temptation. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that there is opportunity, that she really has to struggle with her own definition of who she is, and at what point she would allow herself to say, no, I'm the kind of person that's a one-trick pony. I am a one-man woman. And that's who she is, because she wants to honor that, because that's who she is, whether that's her culture or her just core belief of who she thinks she needs to be, or whether she could really forego all that and flow in the moment and say, you only get to Paris, for some people, one time in your life. For her, it's probably once a decade kind of thing, or a little bit more, but I'm not really attached. I just want her to be able to talk about it when she comes home and not have any guilt about what she experienced, and that I could be happy for her. That's really what I hope happens.
And what, if anything, is there anything you hope to gain out of that?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I think that it would help us be more authentic in who each of us are. And that we could, there was a night a couple years ago in our relationship where I was sharing with her how
I really had a desire to be in a relationship that if I'm feeling or thinking something, that I could say it and maybe only have to filter it a little bit, but just be able to be me in the moment and be in that place where this is who I am, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to shoot everybody in the restaurant or fuck everybody in the restaurant or buy drinks for everybody in the restaurant, but somewhere between do something nice for everybody and murder them in between the two of those extremes, I could share what's going on with me. And so there was a night when we were in a restaurant in Palm Springs, and we had an attractive server serve us, and at some point during that experience, I shared with her, I'm really feeling attracted to the server, to the point where, under certain circumstances, I would consider having carnal relationship with this person. And she looked at me and went, "Who the fuck would say something like that to your date?" And I'm like, "Well, somebody that wants to be honest about what I'm experiencing." And she's like, "Well, you should know that with a woman, you would never say something like that." And I'm like, "Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to get through. I'm trying to get past that, And I had that experience. I didn't necessarily come here looking for it, but it happened. It showed up. And I'm just kind of wanting to be transparent. I don't think I did anything wrong. You do. You think that I've done something wrong, and I'm still, kind of laughing about the whole thing, going, I kind of want to just be free to be me. And I'm not a bad person. I still tend to think I line up more on I'm a good guy than I am the other.
Well, let me contrast that with a situation that actually occurred tonight. We were down to Ocean Beach to visit our friend, and she and we went to amazing vegetarian, not all vegetarian, but a vegetarian and vegan Mexican restaurant down in Ocean Beach. And as we were sitting there, Mike's sitting next to me and Tiffany's sitting across from us, so there is a young waiter. He's got a nice full beard, very attractive guy, very good looking guy. And Michael made a comment as we were sitting at the table and said something. I think he came over and said, do you guys need anything? And, we're like, no, we're fine. And as he's walking away, Mike says, yeah, I need you to take your pants off, and we were laughing. And I was like, I hadn't been paying attention, and I turned and looked and I went, oh, wow, yeah, a little young. And he's like, yeah, that's the problem. He's got the beard, but he's got the beard, and he's really cute, but he's a little too young for me. And this went back and forth for another 10 minutes, interlaced in the conversation. We'd see him, and you could, he'd look at him again. He's like, God, he really is a sexy guy. He's a sexy guy. And I'm like, yeah, but he's got braces. It won't work. And he was like, braces? No way. And so it's this, it's this. We just have fun with it,
right?
And if for some strange reason, some circumstances ended up that he was able to tap that, if that happened, it would be
like this.
Yeah, it'd be like. So how was it? Was it? Because it has absolutely nothing to do with who we are together,
right?
Who we are,
right.
How we connect to each other,
yeah.
And it's not to say that there isn't ego influence and involvement at times, and there isn't times that I think that's the times I was describing when I feel like I need to change him. I got to step back and say, okay, that's an ego response. That's a conditional response, saying this is how you need to be for me to be happy. Oop, time out. Rein it back. But instead of those taking place as brawls between us,
mm-hmm.
that dialogue happens for me, and I use that as a way to, process through my own process, and then come back to it if there's something to come back to, and don't if I don't. Because more often than not, I'll come to a place where there may be absolutely nothing to talk about, or what there is to talk about is about 4 words instead of 3 pages. And it may be nothing more than you know, can we have a conversation about wearing earbuds when you need to listen to your telephone? You know. It's funny, but there is honest to God, I was contemplating this earlier today, and it's so weird that this is coming up as a part of this conversation. Or that this conversation is related to it even. But I was contemplating the construct of sex and relationship, and marveling at the fact that every other species on the planet fucks, but none of them get attached. Not in the way that we do. Mm-hmm. And the fucking is for procreating. They're not doing it because, you know, you don't see the rhinos out fucking other rhinos because, you know, it's for the purpose of procreation. And I think it's fascinating because technically it probably is the same for human beings, that in its original inception, it was strictly a way for this species to procreate itself and move on. And the difference being that because of our developed sensory system, it began to become about the sensations, and it began to become about where you went on one side, the sex became about sensation. This person makes me feel this way. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I want to be with this person because they make me feel this way. So there's an abdication of one's feeling or one's own power, because now this person makes me feel this way instead of I'm feeling this way because of this experience.
Right.
But then bring into the picture the next level of that, or maybe not the next level, but the gradation of ownership, and now relationship, which is an interaction of two energies, has now become a construct instead of a natural interaction. Mm-hmm. It's become a preconceived idea instead of what happens when these two energies interact with each other. You know, if you look all over the universe, all over the planet, nothing interacts with things like we do. Every interaction that any other species has a flow and there's no construct to it. It's, what do you smell like? What's your energy? Are we vibrating, or are we not vibrating? If we're not, to turn and walk away and go do something else. Or if it becomes a territorial thing, you know, it isn't an ego thing. Well, it's an ego thing because it's a survival thing. But it's instinct. That's part of what that ego is. It's that instinctual part of us. So in that contemplation, I was just kind of blown away by the whole thought process of realizing that, wow, we've complicated this so profoundly, because the act of sex, which is about procreation, has become something completely different, because now we have these different experiences between who's having sex with who, and I don't know that may or may not have been part of the original equation or not, but somehow it had to be, because it's still all about energy. It's still all about vibration and compatibility, and why are these energies resonating? What are they contributing to each other? What are they bringing? Are they that's what I was saying earlier about energy up, energy down. Are they uplifting each other, or are they destroying each other?
Right.
Are they doing some combination of both? And if they're doing some combination of both, why?
Right.
Why is the choice to be destructive? You know, that requires a lot of self-evaluation. It requires a lot of internal time. You know, and maybe that's part of, you know, what we're doing with this whole process, is stimulating people to desire that internal space, and to understand that internal space in a way that they've not understood it before.
Sure.
Because that's where the answers are. That's where the transformation takes place.
For me, Jim, all of it goes back to this desire to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And the desire to connect creates an experience of acceptance and the idea of oneness. So we have to have this notion of, I'm not one, and there must be some void or lack that I'm seeking to fill through this idea that it can be accomplished through the union of my energy with yours. And truly, what seems to be a lost art is this notion of self-sex, where if you look at the symbol of the Ankh with the cross with the loop on the top of it, the ancient Egyptians would engage in pleasuring themselves and having the idea prior to release or climax that there was an explosion of energy that was moving up the chakra system out of the crown chakra, and rather than just create this burst of energy out into the cosmos and letting it go, what they learned to do is route it back into themselves again. The energetic exchange during copulation or coitus or marital union or all these different expressions of sexual intimacy generally would happen through the genitals, up the spine, through both, all of the chakras would line up, and there's this union happening all the way up.
Which creates a third larger energy.
Exactly. Yes, it does. And there's this sense that for most people that's difficult to experience by yourself. You can learn to do that if you literally route that energy back down and you imagine it and you practice it. But it seems to happen more naturally or without practice when you're with somebody else. And it's interesting, even the Kama Sutra would describe different positions that you could actually see. Well, the chakras are not aligned in this position versus this position, and how that would be more an aspect of dominance and submission than it would be about union and connection, which is, again, I know we're going to go all over the place with this discussion in our future meetings.
Yeah, because the reality of the sexual experience is it's never the same twice. And if you are connected to your own energy in a deep way, if you make that connection, when you engage in sex, you will find that the person you're choosing to have sex with at that moment is the counterbalance to where your energy is at that time. And part of the challenge with the same consistent partner is that you're getting the same consistent energy.
Right.
And sometimes the desire for something different is because that individual is not able to supply a particular vibration that you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Sometimes it's, and that's where people get into this, well, get creative and, and do role playing and a lot of times that can work, but you're still dealing with the same energy.
Sure.
Same vibration.
Right.
So
it's still C minor.
Right. And it's just C minor.
It's C minor with a red-headed wig.
Yeah. And so the idea of that kind of space, I had to go back to something you said at the beginning about the desire for relationship and the words you used to frame that. If we didn't seek relationship to fix brokenness, it would be much easier to find unconditionalness.
Right, of course.
But when you seek relationship to heal brokenness, then you got to be honest with yourself that that's what you're doing. And
it'll never work.
Right. It won't. But you still got to be honest with yourself that that's what you're doing. Because if you can start to tell yourself the truth about, and that's for everyone, you start to, self-evaluation, self-reflection is understanding what motivates you to do anything.
Right.
And saying, wow, why am I feeling, if I'm lonely, I want to be in a relationship. Then you don't want to be in a relationship. Because if you're carrying loneliness into a relationship, guess what?
The relationship's not going to fix it.
And it's true of all of it.
I am lonely means I am lonely.
Yeah.
Whether I'm by myself or in a crowd, right? I'm lonely.
Which is different from being comfortable being alone.
Yeah. One of the exercises I really enjoy guiding people through is imagining the moment of their birth and their delivery. And when I put people into a slight meditation and a little bit of a hypnotic trance, have them go back and just ask that the universe would reveal this experience of them
being able to observe as their adult self the delivery of their newborn self. And I asked them to notice the energy in the room and the attitudes of mom and dad or whoever else is there. And there's a process in which, newborn has been cleaned up and, swaddled in new clean blankets and everything and presented to mom. And that first, I accept you because you're here and you're breathing, those are the only two conditions. It's hard to accept somebody if they're not there, like they were rushed off to NICU or the emergency room, or you hand a baby to a mom that's not breathing, they're kind of like, ah! That's what would naturally happen. So if you breathe and you're present, chances are those are the only two conditions necessary for a mom to accept a baby. Missing arms, not a big deal. Cleft palate, we can deal with that. All these different things that show up as a way that kids do, moms still can accept that. So breathing and being present are like the fundamental requirements. So then what's interesting is within a day, and when you're looking at this as an adult, there's tears coming down their cheeks, and I often say, okay, now ask mom for you to hold yourself. You in your mind as your adult self are like cradling your newborn self. It's like, I've done this so many times that I can see it so easily. Mm-hmm. And it's like literally the only thing necessary for you to be accepted and to be received into the human family was that you're there and that you're breathing. That's all it took. That's it. Mm. But within a day, you're supposed to make eye contact, learn how to breastfeed, add a week to that. There's all kinds of things that you're supposed to learn how to do. Add a year or two to that. Stand up, walk, begin to talk, go to school, get smiley faces, and all these conditions that are then just bombarded and loaded onto you. That you got to clean your room, and you got to do this and do that, and blah, 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 and I'm responsible for mommy and daddy's happiness, and it used to be all I had to do was breathe and show up, and now there's this whole list I have to do in order to be accepted. And I take people all the way back to the very beginning of, you were always acceptable. And guess what? That never freaking changed. It's still the same way. So dump all this other stuff that you think you have to do in order to accept yourself and to be accepted by everybody else. That's fun. That's a really, really, really powerful fun exercise to do with people. And then to teach them that, mom and dad didn't have everything that you wanted them to have to be able to give you everything that you think that you came here and didn't already have. And you've said that many times in our discussions, that we were whole, complete, acceptable, lovable. There was nothing. We lacked for nothing. We had everything. We still have everything. But boy, are we easily convinced we don't. Just ask my girlfriend. She'll tell you all the things about me that I don't have or I'm not showing up with. And in all fairness, I'm sure I have probably responded in a similar way at times to her as well, even though she's a very amazing, very, very amazing creature, and glad that I'm able to interact with her and have her in my life. You about ready to wrap it for tonight?
Sounds good.
Yeah?
I think we had
I hope we've been stimulating, entertaining to some degree, and relevant. So those are three pretty good things to have as conditions.
Hey, I showed up and I'm breathing.
And you are acceptable, my friend. All right, good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.